What's up, guys? Welcome to another edition of Before the Whistle presented by BRK Insurance Group. If your business is looking for the best in employee benefits, commercial property and casualty insurance, or retirement and 401k plan services, there's no one better suited to meet your challenges and build a plan centered around your needs than BRK Insurance Group. What's going on, y'all? Welcome back to Before the Whistle. I'm your host, Maddy Hudak. I apologize. We had some technical issues with getting out Friday's episode, and then it just kind of came for naught after Tulane's shellacking of the Temple Owls this weekend, which is what I'm really just going to focus on here today in their 52-6 win on homecoming, which as an alumni, it's always special to get a win like that. But to just be the team, this was, I get into this episode, but largely the conversation with people that went to this school was it's still hitting everyone. I think that Tulane is the team that is kind of doing what they're doing to the opponents. Whereas when I went to this school, they were the opponent that everyone scheduled for homecoming specifically to beat by a dominant fashion. So just to see where that has all gone in just this short of a time, but that almost all, takes away credit. I just really want to focus on how dominating this homecoming win was, because this was a game where, yes, Tulane was expected to win. They were the better opponent. They have better talent, better coaching, better pretty much everything in all phases of the game. That does not guarantee you anything in football. This could have easily been a game for Tulane where it's an easy win, but how great do you feel about it coming out of it? There are a lot of wins like that. And without a specific one to point to, I think everyone kind of knows what I'm talking about. Truly, there was nothing to complain about in this game, except for, one explosive play by Therese Worthy on the day that accounted for, 75 of 102 rushing yards on the ground with, at this point, 7 minutes left in the game. Tulane has two starters out there on defense. And then after they ran in that touchdown and hold them on their 2-point conversion attempt, they bring out Kellen Tasby, freshman quarterback, taking snaps from the third string center, Gabe Forston from Georgia Tech, having an entire line of, second, third string guys, including true freshmen out there. So by that point, I'm not really taking that much away from, what the team is, but the fact of the matter is, save for that 1 point, Tulane was still able to hold this margin until the end of the game when their starters stopped playing a long time into it. And that wasn't the case on Temple's side of things. So to see the depth perform pretty much as handily as the starters, it was really great to see. But you also see when the starters get out there, really why this is so impressive for Tulane. And it's really impressive when you look at the final score output for this game for guys like Darian Mensah and Mekhi Hughes, who pretty much played 3 quarters of football, all things considered. And so, to put up 500 and it was either 585, 589 total yards on offense to Temple's 158, and have that be as balanced with 327 rush yards, 262 pass yards in a game where it continuously rained the whole time. The wind was a factor the entirety of the game, and Tulane just had their way with pretty much everything in all 3 phases of that game. Now they're positioned in a very rare opportunity where, looking forward to this Navy midshipman game, they actually can clinch a spot in the conference championship, but they still have to get through that game in order to get there. And I think a lot of this Temple game, you saw them put a lot of intent into putting things on film, getting plays and installs out there that are going to be keys to victory this weekend. And we're going to break those down on today's show. Here's the thing with games like the one that Tulane just played against Temple. They were obviously expected to win and they were expected to dominate. And it was pretty clear fairly early on that Tulane was just the better football team out there. And, watching some of Temple's previous matchups, even though they were able to score on some common opponents, there really just wasn't, that much to really dissect there. But I think where Tulane is receiving due attention is your opponent can be as difficult or not as they are, but you hear the term teams beat themselves. And earlier on in the season, with respect to penalties, at least, that was kind of the conversation for Tulane, was they'll be able to win games as long as they kind of stop beating themselves, which was how you kind of saw a clunky start to a year full of 50 plus new players on the roster. But they are at the point now where beating themselves doesn't really apply here, but the way that they played in all 3 phases of this game and the elements in the way that they did, I just think that has to be celebrated in and of itself. This was a game where the wind was a factor the entire matchup. So much so, it also had to do with the fact that Temple's punter punts kind of rugby style, but that in combination with how much the wind was carrying a lot of things, I thought a really important attention to detail on Tulane's behalf was having both Dante Fleming and Bryce Bohannon back there to field punts. I think Bryce Bohannon caught at least one or two of them, and he's someone that is really steady in the backfield. But just having the thought to do that just goes to show, this is a game easily where it could have been a win where it was still easy for Tulane, but it was clear that they didn't take this opponent seriously, or that they came into it kind of expecting to be the top dogs and, a little talking the talk a little more than walking the walk. I thought that this game was just a complete beatdown by Tulane. And it was one in which you could say that there's really no risk of, and we're kind of at a point in the season where there aren't any of those games to be left. But anytime people have brought up whether or not a game on Tulane's schedule this year could be a trap game, I really haven't even thought that much about it, just because of the way John Summerall approaches each week with a sense of urgency. And yeah, sometimes some of that might be coach speak in terms of overselling an opponent, but it also goes to show there are upsets that happen. And if you don't point out the small details about your opponent in which they can beat you, then you don't really deserve to win at all. And so the fact that the attention to detail was there for me, for Tulane, really said it all. And so the win was a factor the entire game, really through all four quarters. And you could see adjustments that Darian Mensah had to make in the air to account for that. This is also Patrick Durkin, who was a freshman kicker, had not kicked in a game setting yet. First game setting with really high wind. And then it's just kind of raining on and off pretty much the entirety of the game. And if you were there, I don't really have to explain the conditions to you. It was never really pouring rain at any time to where it would affect things in terms of, not being able to see or really hold on to the football. But it was enough to get slippery. And it was enough that, I heard a conversation when it was a pass where I think it was third down. Darian Mensah was about to run out of bounds, threw it to Mario Williams, who ended up kind of sliding out of bounds. I don't remember if it was ruled complete or incomplete in the first place, but it was not complete. And I heard them talking on the sideline, and Mario was like, yeah, I just couldn't keep my footing. It was pretty soggy in Yeoman Stadium at that point of about 3 hours of just kept raining and raining. And so those kind of games, and I had said this, it wouldn't surprise me if we don't really see that much of a passing attack for Tulane due to the elements. The fact that they really stayed true to themselves and what they like to do, no matter what the wind or rain was really telling them, that's a sign of a really dominating team. And yeah, I think that it's safe to say that around 21 pass attempts is what Darian Mensah's sweet spot has been this year. To have 14 completions, go for 262 yards, and throw for 2 passing touchdowns, he has been one of the most efficient passers that you could ask for. And it's the way that he just continues to spread the ball out to different receivers. There has been different leading receivers as the weeks have gone on, but it was really impressive to me for a guy that has not played at all in a collegiate setting, let alone hasn't played with Darian Mensah since, April, except for counting the last couple of weeks. His connection with Shaz Preston on that touchdown, that was one of the most exciting moments I can remember in Yeoman Stadium for a long time. And I've said Shaz Preston is probably the player I cannot remember being asked more about, besides Michael Pratt, I guess, about his availability on a week-by-week basis. And, I saw his size and his high point ability in spring camp, and you saw all that potential, but nothing was proven in a game setting until this weekend. And my goodness, that 53-yard reception was as impressive of a throw catch, especially considering there was a little bit of route confusion going on there. But it was just a complete domination by Tulane in all phases of this game. To have 5 rushing touchdowns and have 3 of those come from guys that aren't named Mekhi Hughes, that's incredible. And what Mekhi Hughes is doing is really nothing short of that. It's really hard for me to fathom how he even can do this workload that he does and average 8.1 yards a carry. He had 19 carries for 153 yards in this matchup. In 14 days, I think he's had 76 carries for 465 yards and 5 rushing touchdowns. That's, 3 games in that 14-day span at that. But you also really have seen how deep of a room Tulane has in that running back group. I was surprised a little bit to see Jamari McClure out there because you're still kind of looking at that red shirt for him. But ultimately, this is the game this weekend that matters. And so I really, really thought that this game couldn't have come at a better time, especially to get those kind of deeper guys a little bit of their feet wet before playing the Navy midshipmen, because, there's only really so much of this game to break down on all sides of the ball. When it's a 52-6 win, Tulane was just kind of playing with their food, and not in the way that, sometimes that's used to describe letting a team kind of get back into it. And it wasn't in a disrespectful way either, but they were setting up a lot of tendencies on film, I think, for this critical final stretch. Something that I pointed out back at Charlotte, it was pretty clear for a couple weeks where Sydney and Banasour was initially included in that, but it's been mostly Sean Nicholas and Bryce Bohannon. When they've gone out as wide receivers, it was usually a run play, and it was usually a run play to that direction because they're your best blocking wide receivers, but that starts to eventually telegraph plays. Then in Charlotte, there was a Ty Thompson run in the red zone that they lined that all up, and then he ran the opposite direction, and you could tell how much of a difference that makes, and that's just one more wrinkle to now have to prepare for on film. Something I noticed, I did a sideline hit on this during the game. There were multiple plays in that opening stretch where they played that personnel and ended up throwing passes several times. And it was early on enough in the game to where, again, I don't know how much Navy is going to really look at this game on film in terms of what elements to look for Tulane. But if they don't, then they'll miss out on a few wrinkles that Tulane added in there. And which running backs they really have to account for. I mean, you had a lot of great output between Mekhi Hughes, Ty Thompson on his attempts, his 50-yard rushing touchdown. He's the fastest guy on the team, and it showed. But then you had Trey Cornist out there and Arnold Barnes, who had 2 rushing touchdowns. All of them can make really big hits. They're all kind of battering rams. Jamari McClure, I'd say, probably has the most finesse out there. The speed on one of Arnold Barnes' touchdown runs where he ran outside, that really impressed me as well. And that also matters to me when you think about the playing surface and the fact that speedy, short area quickness guys like Mario Williams were notably saying that they were losing their footwork out there. So for a guy that has had balance issues in the past in Arnold Barnes and is just by definition a bigger guy, for him to be able to have that outside speed on that run, it was really impressive to see. And something that I think you can really say about this Tulane team, and I've said it a lot of these weeks, is they've learned from their mistakes, and they don't really seem to have the same issues come back to bite them on a week-by-week basis. I think their slow start against Rice really scared the crap out of them, team-wide. We talked to players in that next Tuesday press conference, and they all kind of said that they were really surprised by how hard Rice really came to play in that game. Probably so was Davie when they ended up losing to them the other week. But I think that slow start from the bye week kind of rattled them and showed them how quickly you can kind of get lulled. And I wouldn't say into a false sense of security, but sometimes when you're just kind of lulled into a slow start, it takes something in order to be able to break out of that. Mekhi Hughes out of halftime basically broke them out of that spell against Rice. But I think it did kind of show them that you really can't allow a game to kind of come down to the end. And especially as they're going into this final stretch. So for them to go out there, they scored on, I think, 8 of 14 of their total drives, but they were just incredibly efficient in putting this game away early enough to, not only be able to just show convincingly how able they were, how well they were able to punish them in all 3 phases, but you got such important time on task for all guys out there on the field. And it's really mattered for this team where you really don't notice when there's a key injury on the team. They were without Sam Howard. Those linebackers played as good as you could ask for. And again, yes, it's Temple. You're hoping to get probably Sam Howard back for this game against Navy because those linebackers are really going to matter. But I keep bringing this up. They're at the stretch at this time last year where Tulane was in must win for the rest of the season, but they weren't really winning games by that convincing of victories, and they were dropping like flies as the weeks went by. They were at this point without Lawrence Keys, Jaquan Jackson, and I think Chris Brazel was available at times. And if not, he was just completely blanketed out there. Michael Pratt was a little bruised up. It was just everything really started to crumble around this time last year. So to get that critical playing time out there for these guys, where ultimately it was still Temple starters out there. So Tulane's backups were able to perform pretty much as well as their starters. That really says a lot to me, but you have to also give it to the starters that have just made it to be what it is at this point, where it's very clear that there is a talent discrepancy. There's this, there's just a very large discrepancy in the American. And the thing that was really the conversation on the sideline for homecoming, and I'm sure people that are alumni that are listening to this can feel, exactly what I'm talking about. There's been so many years where Tulane has been the homecoming scheduler, the other opponent always love to schedule Tulane and proceed to deliver what Tulane delivered to Temple. So to be on the other side of that for homecoming in front of the alumni, that was really, it just that to me really capped off what I think has been an incredible first season under John Summerall, where now for the first time they're on a run here where they can clinch a spot in the conference championship game with a win against Navy this weekend. And that's very different from the last 2 seasons where they have been playing in must wins down to the final game of the year. But at the same time, when you look at this team and you look at the way they've really just kind of approached competition this year, I think they would all agree that if they don't beat Navy, then I don't know if they, I wouldn't say deserve, because I don't think anyone deserves to be in the conference championship, but Memphis has already kind of fallen in terms of that win or loss. Really, it's not going to matter if Tulane can't beat Navy. And ultimately, that's really what you're looking for this weekend. Tulane has actual full control of their destiny going into week 12 with a week left to just play for home field advantage and maybe get to rest guys, even though they'll have a bye after this game. But this is really for all the marbles. This is everything this team has looked for all season long. And it's the sole thing in all of this mess of college football that they're able to control. So to me, this game is everything. And I think John Summerall has always been great to motivate this team. And it's really easy to come off of a performance where your offense performs the way it did. Your defense just continues to perform the way it did, which I'm going to break down now. And special teams just having that, I just wrote a piece on this. Will Carroll is not even eligible for NCAA punting stats because they require a minimum of 3.6 punts a game. He punted 3 times against Temple, punted 1 time the week prior against Charlotte, but all of them matter. He, averaged 47.7 yards a punt. 2 of his 3 went inside the 20, and he had a long of 54. So again, as efficient as you could ask for. And Patrick Durkin, yes, he got the start to kick field goals. And again, he has not kicked all season long. So incredibly important experience out there. The fact that Tulane has multiple kickers, and it's not a situation where if you have 2, then you have none kind of thing. Patrick Durkin, he just had a great week in practice, and now he has experience in a game setting and in a one with really bad elements. I don't want to jinx this team out, but it's hard for me to imagine more rain that would make any difference in terms of how much it already had dominated the game than when Tulane faced against Navy last year. But they had really not played a game in the rain at all last year before that point. So to get this one out of the way and play their brand, not kind of play this rain grinded out gritty game that ends up with a kind of low scoring margin. I think they had something like 5 passing plays go for 195 yards. Again, it's just the explosiveness of this offense, rain or shine, wind or not. Poise of Darian Mensah is always there. And any questions about chemistry and drops from this wide receiving group, it just goes away by the week. And for a team to be clicking on all fronts like this is really the best time you could ask for that to happen. Defensively speaking, save for a 75-yard touchdown that, we started laughing on postgame as I teed up that segment saying, I know John Summerall is usually more critical after wins than he is losses, which are, it's hard to remember back in September at that point. But it's kind of hard to find anything to nitpick in this game. We immediately go down to the locker room and he's criticizing the explosive touchdown run. So we kind of started laughing. It was fair enough. Going back and looking at it, you had a blitz by Chris Rogers at linebacker. At this point, he is next to Mekhi Williams. So that's where we are in the depth chart. I went and charted this out. There were 2 starters left on the field at that point. And I'll go through all who those kind of were. But, Chris Rogers over pursues the play. Then Evan Simon ends up handing off the ball to Terez Worthy, who gets through about 6 or so defensive players for Tulane. Both Mekhi Williams and Kevin Adams were in position to tackle. They both kind of whiffed on it. And then you just kind of had guys chasing him down with not as much speed as you've perhaps seen them chase down touchdowns in previous weeks. So I understand the frustration from a head coach that really wants perfection, just not for himself, but for these guys and for their season goals. But looking at that, who was out there at that point, you had Jaden Lewis at spear, Jaheim Johnson and Lou Tillery at cornerback. You had Chris Rogers and Mekhi Williams as your 2 linebackers. I'd almost call Kevin Adams. He's not, I guess, a starter every single game, but he started enough of them. So him and Jalen Geiger, who I call, one of the 2 starters up there. And then Gerard Henderson, Eric Hicks, who's the second starter, Terrell Allen and Javon Carter at that bandit role. So how much I'm going to really look at that makeup of Tulane's defense in terms of, are they going to be able to contain explosive plays against Navy? Everything else in that game really indicated that that was the case. It was tough to kind of do any type of study on Temple that was worth watching, knowing that there was an injury to Dante Wright, which kind of throws a lot of their offense out of the window, but also not having really any common opponents to look at, in their last 2 wins being against Tulsa and ECU, neither of which are good teams. And, Tulsa, they're both just kind of at the bottom there. I think ECU, I've always thought they're a better team than their record indicated. But that's kind of you're kind of looking at in order to prepare for this game. Yes, they've played, I think, Navy and I think Memphis, if I'm remembering correctly. But all of that to really say, just throwing that out the window, there really weren't that much tendencies to pick up on, and there really wasn't that much to know what to expect going into this game. So this was a game where you were looking at Tulane fixing themselves. And something I noticed last week in practice, I'll be curious to see if it replicates this Tuesday. They did a version of the Oklahoma drill, a legal version of it, because you can't do exactly what it is, but it was for largely one-on-one contact of linemen to end the team period on Tuesday, which was a noted departure from anything we've seen all season long. And so I had asked John Summerall about that last Tuesday in their media availability, and I wrote a piece on this. That was his entire thing, was he thought they tackled really poorly against Charlotte. Even though they only allowed 3 points, you go and look back at that drive where they did allow those 3 points, and really bad tackling along the way. I got what he said, where it looked like they just were kind of launching themselves and hoping that something would stick. Now, that was a game where they were exhausted, and it really showed out there. And it was something that it wasn't a worry about the slow start, but just an acknowledgement of the last time they had this large of a down period was the bye week. And by the time Saturday rolled around, last Thursday at Charlotte seemed a really long time ago at that point. So you were, I guess, mildly worried about that kind of slow start. And the fact that the defense, there's 35 total tackles in this game. Those came from 22 different players. There are 4 players that were tied for the top in terms of tackling that all had 3 total tackles. This was the most all 3 levels of the field effort that I have seen out of a Tulane defense, to be honest with you. It was backups, it was starters. Every single guy was producing out there. They had 6 sacks, they had 2 quarterback hits, and that's the way they've really shut down opposing defenses these last couple of weeks. They make the quarterback uncomfortable as hell. And that's really going to matter looking towards the midshipmen, who I'm going to do a little more dive into. I really haven't even had time to get to that at this point, with it being Monday. But looking at this game, there's a lot of the time to me where I think the offense, especially with a guy like Mekhi Hughes, even if they weren't firing on all cylinders, you could still see a score, I think, that just kind of gets run up. Kind of like what you saw in Charlotte, where they were a tired team and they were a better team, and that showed in their score, aided by a pick 6 by Micah Robinson. This was a game where, you are kind of worried sometimes, where it's an enemy you don't know. It's not really a team to fear in Temple. On a defensive side, how much is the sense of urgency there? This game, they had 8 3-and-outs and 5 in a row. That's demoralizing, all things considered. To have 5 back-to-back 3-and-outs, it really was just incredible what they were able to hold down. But to bring up that explosive run from before, the reason, I wanted to mention it was that was a 75-yard touchdown run. They had 158 total yards on the day. They had 102 rushing yards, meaning they had otherwise 27 total rushing yards. They had 5 total first downs in this game. They were 1 of 13 on 3rd down. They were 0 of 1 on 4th down. It was just one of those games where Tulane just had their way with Temple. And all things considered, that's what you want going into this final stretch. But to me, this defense, I had almost trouble awarding the player of the game on our post game, and Steve Barrios and I were talking. I had half a mind to give it to the entire defense because stat-wise, nothing was really standing out. But the reason I brought up the Oklahoma drill, and the reason John Summerall pointed it out, was his first words when I asked him were defensive ends, and then went into the tackling. So the emphasis to me, he said that being there. And I thought that Gerard Henderson and Deshaun Batiste were guys that made as much of an impact as those key starters in this game. And those are guys where Gerard Henderson was one of the, scout players of the week in training camp. Deshaun Batiste, he came over from Troy, we didn't really put these guys on our depth chart at first to start off. But there were several reps where I looked out there and I'm like, that was a really great rep by Deshaun Batiste. Like his use of hands, he just completely won that battle. And I was kind of disappointed to see he wasn't credited with any of the pressures on the stat sheet, because it really seemed clear that there were several plays that he had an effect on whoever ended up making either the sack or the quarterback hit. Gerard Henderson having both a sack and a tackle for loss. And there was a point where we had to figure out all of a sudden who 47 was on the defensive line. It was Terrell Allen, who is number 9. I went and found out from the karate consultant Mike Storms that his jersey had just kind of been ripped in half on a play. And it just goes to show, how much of a clawing match this game really was. And it was a game where I thought Tulane showed their a really good discipline in terms of only being penalized 5 times for 30 total yards. And this is really, a game, again, where the younger guys had a lot of time on task out there. And that's kind of when you start to see the penalty yards rack up. But you just didn't see that from Tulane. And this is about as impressive of a team that I can remember. It does kind of prove to me, if nothing else, that runs do feel very different from one year to the next. It was really hard to kind of separate at the time, back to back, the Cotton Bowl run and the 2023 run that ended in the conference championship loss to SMU, where it was kind of hard to say that much criticism about Tulane because they were winning game by game, week after week, but it didn't really feel like they were improving or you were really learning that much about the team as the weeks went on. The fact that this is a game where they could have probably ran as vanilla of a game plan as they would have wanted and been able to execute against Temple, and that's no offense to Temple, is just where they're at in terms of talent and personnel, having a lot of injuries and just, probably being where Tulane was a couple of years back from now. But Tulane really let it all out there. And they put a lot on tape. And I think that's really something that the Navy midshipmen have to take seriously, how Tulane deployed all of their playmakers against this Temple offense. Getting Alex Bauman involved, I thought, back in the red zone was really important. That's just something that he establishes such a threat in the red zone. And it was really great to see that. And then, to get a guy like Fat Watts, I want to say it was his first catch because he had his torn ACL. I can't remember. It was either that or, since he tore it. But all that to say, this was a cool game to kind of watch the guys that have really just been really good team guys get some time out there. And it wasn't really in a fluky way either. They have been in these plays. They tried to throw to him in the red zone against Charlotte. That was a game that was, an almost interception by Darian Mensah. And Mensah threw one interception in this game. John Summerall immediately took credit for that in our halftime report and really reaffirmed that in the post game as well. It's incredible to be talking about this with 50 plus new players on the roster, a redshirt freshman that entered the quarterback competition with 2 weeks left in it. A defense that we really couldn't even figure out who was the presumed starter and was solidifying themselves to enter conference play. And they have just gone on an incredible run since then and now have a rare opportunity to clinch a spot in the conference championship this weekend. And it's going to require all hands on deck. It's going to require beating, it's not just triple option, it's triple option on steroids with their ability in the passing game now, but something that's going to be really important this week. That's something that we learned from John Summerall is that Rob Green at safety and Greg Casperado have a lot of experience against this offensive coordinator. And I was kind of trying to figure it out. They both played at Warford. So I don't know if they played against Drew Kronick. I don't know if I'm saying his name wrong, and I apologize if I am. I don't have a pronunciation guide yet. As he was a coach while they were both players, they didn't overlap, I don't think. But I also talked with Rob Green, and he said the first game he called plays against was against this offensive coordinator. So it's really good to know that you have at least that experience there on the defensive side of the ball. And that's going to matter in a game like this where I think the tiniest edge can make a difference. To me, for Tulane, I think that's going to come down to how they performed in the red zone. And that's what I really just kind of want to wrap this up with. When I was looking at the red zone stats for Tulane, I was kind of wondering why they were lower. They were 75th in red zone defense last week. They don't seem to have any weight system for outside of just listing how many ones were field goals, what that percentage is without them. To me, I think you really have to look at a team, without those field goals, how many times they were able to score touchdowns on those attempts, because the difference between 3 and 7 points makes the difference in games to me. And so when you take that out of the equation, Tulane moves up in my arbitrary system to, 11th, where they only have 13 passing touchdowns scored on 29 total, or not passing. They have 20 or 13 total touchdowns scored on 29 red zone attempts. 11 of those are field goals. So when I was looking at a lot of the teams that were ranked higher than Tulane, they had kind of similar pass touchdowns allowed. It was just that they allowed less field goals. And so their total number was a little lower than Tulane's when you just looked at what the percentage was. But just looking at these games for Tulane, the red zone is what will win and lose you championships, just to say the least, especially if, let's be serious. We're looking at if Army and Tulane win out, that's the matchup. And I have to go back and watch them against North Texas and figure out how they held them to 3 points, being as explosive as they are. But when you look at games like that, 3 points can make the difference. Holding a team to 3 versus 7 points can make the difference. That's something that I think is really important to look at for Tulane, where their red zone percentage on what they allow on touchdowns, it is a lot better than what it was at this time last year. And it's better than it was a week ago. They were Temple was 0 of 1 in the red zone. But a problem for Tulane last year as well was their offense's ability to capitalize on red zone attempts. And they've just completely feasted this year. And I think I wrote this somewhere just to cap really what the difference is here. They have a 4th scoring offense in the nation, and they're 7th in pass efficiency, 3rd in the nation in time of possession. So that gives a lot of credence to what we've been able to see them do on defense. But this was the standard. This was the mentality. This was the identity that John Summerall was chasing with this team. And they're in perfect position to really portalet forward into a championship berth with a win against the Navy midshipmen this weekend.